Well, hello there. Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining me. I'm your buddy, Admiral Teag, and this little interview is going to have to be on the record. I have a library computer on this ship, and my intelligence officers are always looking for any threat to Star Trek, because what we do here at Saving Star Trek is try to save Star Trek from itself. And I would just ask, if you have a moment, could you push the like and follow, perhaps the notification buttons for this channel that you've been destined to come across? You were brought here for a reason. You were brought here to help prevent the travesty in the world of Star Trek. The travesty, well, that would be Star Trek 14. I don't know what to tell you about this damned and terrible project, except that we have a library computer on this ship and we have downloaded some intelligence. Now here we have our friends at Crime Recaps, which is a YouTube channel with 2.29 thousand subscribers. We congratulate them on their success. Kapla! However, they are delivering us the most recent intelligence we have on the Star Trek 14 movie. It's called Star Trek 4 Recasting for Next Generation Revealed. It's got 137,000 views, and it's about 1 month old. It was dropped right back on the last couple of days of November. So here we go with Star Trek 4 Recasting for Next Generation Crew Revealed. And this is just as phony as could be. The story is real. The reporting is real. It's the news that's fake, but it's fake from the source. We have a fake fruit tree growing fruity fake news over at New Trek, and the farmers who have grown this crop of beautiful fake news are none other than J.D. McKay, Patrick McKay, J.D. Payne, and J.J. Abrams, the liars and losers who have created such terrible shows as Star Trek Discovery, The Rings of Power, and such horrible movies as Star Trek 09 and Star Trek Into Darkness, Star Wars The Force Awakens, and maybe the worst of them all, Star Trek The Rise of Skywalker. Star Wars' Rocky Horror Picture Show, a movie so bad it can only be laughed at. So let's see about what Star Trek is up to with their Star Trek 14. Now, J.J. Abrams is probably going to direct this because he's already screwed over 2 other people by lying to them and telling them they would be the creators. That would be Noah Hawley, and before that it was Quentin Tarantino, who speculated on Next Generation crossovers. So this idea, stolen from the best. If you're going to rob the best. They own a story treatment, I suppose.
A return to the big screen, and as is the Star Trek tradition, in a big way. Shake-ups to the cast, tying up some very annoying loopholes, and a certain
What loophole would that be?
unfulfilled Star Trek project. Join us as we discuss everything you need to know about the next Star Trek project, as well as the movie that never.
The movie that never was is simply this movie. They're talking now about how they're going to have the TV
Generation
show.
will make.
Listen to this. We're going to have a jump off from some of the TV show people into this show. Something I predicted as a worst case.
Star Trek movie, the cast of Star Trek The Next Generation will make a cameo appearance.
This is a worst case scenario of me being right.
But the roles of the renowned Enterprise D crew members will be played by new actors. Not
We're going to muddy the continuity of the movies, which is separate. It's still bad, but it's separate from the TV shows, and try to make it harder for new writers who come in to make any sense of it. Really, what these people are doing is making Star Trek really bad and really complicated so they can keep it. They're beating up their Star Trek IP like an abused spouse. And like an abused spouse, they feel that the fans can be conditioned to feel there's nowhere else to go, and this is just as good as it gets.
Not only will Next Generation characters like Jean-Luc Picard, Geordi LaForge, and Worf make cameo appearances in Star Trek 4, but the film will also serve in essence as a backdoor pilot for the.
See, they're going to be messing up between the shows and the movies. And if you look at their continuity with shows, there's now at least
franchises soon to be released.
At least as many timelines for the shows.
It's a big chance for Paramount Pictures to try to recast one of the most beloved starship crews in the entire history of science fiction.
now these people are no longer as beloved as they once were, thanks to the behavior of their one-time captain, Jean-Luc Picard, Patrick Stewart, who has steadily undermined his show and his original role as Jean-Luc Picard by expressing contemptuous views of his own work and contemptuous views of Star Trek The Next Generation, and by undermining the plot and showing himself as a jackass in the show Picard, a show so bad that its entire plot has had to be waved away at the beginning of each season. At the beginning of each season of Star Trek Picard, they have had to say what happened before never happened, because it's too complicated and overbearingly stupid to continents. And really, at the end of Star Trek Picard Season 1, we set up a scenario which Doomcock correctly has pointed out means that the world probably ended anyway. When they call these massively intelligent cybernetic Cthulhus, these evil AIs, to Earth. And by the way, that made the Romulan bad guys right, okay? So Starfleet, once again, the bad guys in their own Star Trek story. But once they knew where to go to find the organic life whose existence they despise, these cybernetic Cthulhus did not need our permission to continue, and the evil robots who turned into good robots for no reason, out of nowhere, out of the blue, and turned off their AI portal to let in the cybernetic Cthulhu, it doesn't matter. The Cthulhu now knows we're there. All life in the Picard universe ends at the end of Season 1, whether they admit it or not, is actually a very strong case. Doomcock may be right, and Doomcock was right many times. Hashtag Doomcock was right.
The fact that they are doing it, it does make sense in a variety of different ways to do so. Next up, what in the world is the Kelvin timeline?
Okay, I'm going to save us some copyright time by just saying, and here's that graphic, that misleading graphic again. The Star Trek Kelvin timeline is really nothing. It's nothing at all. It's a made-up device by J.J. Abrams to get out of telling us what's really going on, and to get out of the commitments and the reality of the old canon. The old canon had stuff that made sense that you weren't supposed to go around. Like, you were not supposed to have Romulans introduced before a certain time. You were not supposed to have James T. Kirk be captain of the Enterprise before a certain time. You were not supposed to have James T. Kirk be a lying, underhanded cheater who gets rewarded for cheating by a now corrupt Starfleet. You were not supposed to have an evil Starfleet. You were not supposed to blow up the planet Vulcan. J.J. Abrams, disdainful of all that and needs to blow up a planet. He has had planet destruction, Death Star type technology in every movie since this first Star Trek movie of his that we're seeing cast pictures of, Star Trek 09, where Cadet Kirk ends up as captain of the Enterprise in a stupid twist of events that is just un-Star Trek-like and an insult to the then fans, as they recap how we got nowhere.
Of much debate. It made its debut in the controversial
we had just been playing with the sound off. They made its debut in the controversial movies. It was J.J. Abrams' cheap writing hack to get out of doing anything. He couldn't keep up the continuity.
and the recasting of the original Enterprise crew.
Why they're using footage from Star Trek Enterprise is simply because the actor here is supposed to be a clone of Picard. And then we're showing all the most action-packed stuff from the movies that we've gotten so far. And what have we said?
On the other hand, the first movie in the Kelvin timeline made $385 million at the...
That is still only a little bit more than it made, and probably break even when you come down to the press that went with it. But it was more money than Star Trek movies had made aggregate, because they didn't adjust for inflation, and they were sweet-talked by the people who had made great show Lost. A
box
show that
office.
never
The
ended.
even more controversial Star Trek Into Darkness made even more, and
The third movie did okay, but Into Darkness really just cannibalized and destroyed the entire franchise by pulling things forward from the middle of the story without properly introducing them. Now, I've said again and again, and here's that deceptive graphic again. Isn't it just absolutely reprehensible what Star Trek forces the people who report on it to do? Now, I don't blame the people from Crime Recap for what happened in their retelling of this Star Trek story in the least. It's just not their fault. They were lied to, just like the rest of us. and they're trying to report something that really did happen. Unfortunately, what we're finding out, and I'm taking out the visual component now because there's no point, there's no more visual, there's no new visual, there's no press conference to show you. Nothing that they said happened. Now, as much as this might be right, and let's see if we can't do this for you for fun. Can we make her say, yes, I bypassed the compressor? This is the work of J.J. Abrams right there in the media file on your screen. That's the kind of stuff you get from J.J. Abrams. When Rey says, I bypassed the compressor in The Force Awakens, it's because J.J. Abrams didn't do his research. The plot of movie Empire Strikes Back, Star Wars Episode 5, as it would be in the George Lucas numbering. And who didn't enjoy that movie? Well, I can tell you who. J.J. Abrams couldn't be bothered to take notes or finish watching the movie. In that movie, the hyperdrive is broken because of a problem with the compressor. That necessitates the entire plot of the movie. It also is a little bit of a loose end for George Lucas because from implication, and implication only because it's not stated directly, we have to assume that you can travel faster than light without using hyperspace in the Star Wars universe, and I'll tell you why. In the movie Empire Strikes Back, they only go to Bespin because it's the closest place they can get to without using hyperspace. Now, unless they can go faster than light, it's going to take them many, many, many hundreds of years, which we know it doesn't. They get to the Lando system, as Leia calls it, before Han tells her, Lando's not a system, it's a man. The system is Bespin. They go there to hide, and they're tracked there by Boba Fett, who follows the Millennium Falcon away from the Imperial fleet where it's hidden itself by faking having hyperdrive and landing on the outer hull of an Imperial ship, showing that the Empire, while tough, and it had been nothing but tough in these first two movies, was kind of easy to put one over on and suffered from groupthink and linear thinking and was overconfident and did not have a lot of imagination, because really once they eliminated the idea the ship could have gone to hyperspace or had a cloaking device, because no ship the size of the Falcon does in their continuity, they did not look around for line of sight or someone would have seen it. However, when Rey says she bypassed the compressor, that makes her a better mechanic on the Millennium Falcon than Han Solo. Han Solo, played by the original actor, looks back at Rey, who says this canon-destroying thing, and assents to it silently by sort of nodding. And when she explains why, he finishes the explanation with her. So he's validated what she's done. We had the original actor. He's in fanfic, so it doesn't have to count unless you count these movies, these sequel movies, as part of the real Star Trek, which I don't. But what they've done here is what Star Trek has done with Picard. They've recontextualized a good story from the past into a terrible story for the future by destroying the old story. In Star Trek Into Darkness, we throw Khan out there without an introduction. It's like having anonymous sex in a men's room at night in a New York City public park. Nobody can see anything. Nobody knows exactly who they're with. They just know that it feels kind of good and they don't want it to stop. And maybe there's a second introduction and maybe there isn't, but George Michael got arrested for it, and the creators who made this Star Trek movie should be arrested for what they did too. But here we go with the rest of what we know about Star Trek 4. Let's let the people from Crime Recaps take it away.
Not enough of a fan turnoff to prevent them from attempting the same trick with the cast of The Next Generation.
They're trying to say they're going to find a way around time travel in this to mate together two stories that are close to 100 years apart. That should be a hoot.
In Star Trek 4, it makes perfect sense for the production company to investigate the possibility of expanding the Kelvin timeline brand.
Oh, I don't know how they do this because the Kelvin timeline is made through time travel. The Kelvin timeline, as our friend Captain Infinity will happily point out, can't exist because it's timeline B. It's timeline B. It's not timeline A. J.J. Abrams created it anyway. Captain Infinity might be right about literary time travel. In fact, I subscribe to what he says for the most part. But people in Hollywood are not interested in making a good movie or a movie that makes sense. They want a profitable movie. So what we get here is an unattainable timeline B that shouldn't exist, and it's offensive and has to be forgiven from the very start with Spock's time travel. But it's very cleverly done, as we have original Spock, played by the great Leonard Nimoy, delivering the damaging dialogue in Star Trek '09, where he basically says, "It makes sense, you just can't understand it because it's too complicated." Never accept this writing hack. J.J. Abrams has used it so often that he had to say it without saying it in Rise of Skywalker, when Palpatine says, "I've been dead before. The dark side of the Force is the pathway to many abilities some considered to be unnatural." And that's it. That's all you get. You get some retest and repurposed dialogue, and that's what they're going to do again. Let's hear what they have to say.
Release of the most recent Star Trek feature film, and that the release date for the movie's release date for the next installment is not expected to be set for at least another year.
Now, this was set when this came out, but they may have made this before it dropped. But the release date for the movie is and remains 12/22 or 12/23, and I believe that's the international date line playing in. It's 12/22 that this movie is supposed to drop in the United States, for what that's worth.
In the meantime, the careers of actors like Chris Pine,
Will that be all, be all, be all?
Zoe Saldana, Carl Urban, and
You can tell it's an AI here because her name is Zoe Saldana. They're buying time here simply by saying the names of the crew of the new ship.
feel more expensive to continue signing them to Star Trek deals. Now,
Right, so they're back in the same old problem again, where Star Trek actors have become too expensive. Although I'd say a lot of this cast has done so badly that they've become a lot cheaper, John Cho.
canonically speaking, about 110 years have passed between the conclusion of the original series, starring the original
Now, that is not the Roddenberry timeline. The conclusion of the original series and the beginning of the next generation is about 80 years. About 80 years.
cast of the Kelvin timeline crew, and the beginning of the rebooted show. The most interesting thing to consider is how
The most interesting thing to consider, as I let Star Trek recasting continue to play, because it's not saying anything, and believe me, there is no information or visuals that we're not going to get out of them, as they have spent almost 3 minutes spinning their wheels here and talking about things that don't matter, and they're scaring us by showing us Cisco and
but
Deep Space
occasionally have
Nine.
cameos by exceedingly elderly versions of Dr. McCoy or Mr. Scott, who
Mr. Scott was the same age he was when we last saw him. He was younger than he was when we see him. The actor was, than when we see him in Star Trek Generations later. He was frozen in time in a transporter beam in a way that made sense for Star Trek. Even if you didn't like it, it made sense within the Star Trek canon. As they go on with some not so well-searched information, but it seems like crime recaps is more their thing than this Star Trek movie, and they just were hoping to get some traffic with it, and they really didn't do that great, because Star Trek, just more of a turnoff.
would be
than
frozen in
anything,
stasis by a transporter beam. On the other,
as I said.
a conceivable alternative, considering that Star Trek has never been reluctant to include time travel shenanigans in the plot lines of either the original series.
All right, they did it 3 or 4 times out of 90 stories, so we can't say that they were all about it, even though they were never reluctant either. When they did do time travel, there were 2 different people who wrote it. Twice out of the 3 times we use it in the original series, it's written by Star Trek staff writers who have a unified version. You fly at a ludicrous speed behind a star and build up to even more ludicrous speed and go like warp 30 and break the time-space continuum barrier, at which point you have some control and you fly around the sun. It's implied one way to go forward and the other way to go back. Very simple, not doable, but literally consistent within itself. That is the first method of time travel in Star Trek. The other method, it's just magic from the Garden Garden of Forever. It's just magic. It's only magic in the other methods of time travel. In Star Trek 4, they use their internally consistent slingshot maneuver behind the sun.
Or the following generation. Because of this, it is possible that this will be the last time that we see the crew led by Chris Pine.
And we feel good for the actors that they're being released from their pain. And look at these. As I look at these graphics, it's fan art like I like to show you, and our Enterprise fan art this week is great. I don't know who did it. I just searched fan art Star Trek, the Enterprise, till I found a cool new picture of their ship. And I really do love this rendering of a Constitution-class ship in a asteroid field. And it couldn't be a more perfect representation of what our poor Star Trek has been through. You know, the day they put our poor old Star Trek down. And they are just spinning their wheels here, trying to get this video of theirs up to an acceptable length of time.
In this iteration of the franchise before drawing any conclusions. In other words, we will have to wait and see how fans will react to yet another turnover.
Yes, we're going to have to see how people react to this.
In the cast of a beloved franchise.
Okay, now I'm going to say at this point we have been conditioned to like reboots, and that we haven't been far enough or through enough with these with this new old crew to feel bad.
Concept that ended up being scrapped. At this point, even the most optimistic Star Trek fans will have resigned themselves to the fact that the long-awaited fourth installment,
long-awaited or much feared,
the Kelvin timeline, is pretty much cursed, and it is dangerously close to being
cursed.
Permanently lost to development hell.
They will never let go of this. We're going to have to tear it out of Bad Reboot's hands. They do not care about us. They only care about money. Bad Reboot and Secret Hideout, the same company, two sides of the same crooked coin, two faces on the same loaded dice.
If you want to know what that's like, just ask fans that were excited for Batwoman. This is due to the fact the production
Batwoman, a show that would outperform Star Trek Discovery on TV. Star Trek Discovery, brought to us by the terrible writers of the Rings of Prime, as European folklore calls it. The Lord of the Rings send-up Rings of Power.
Production of the fourth installment in the franchise has been going on for a long time, and that never, and we mean never, spells good fortune for any project. If we are
you see how they're just not able to tell us anything and how it's an AI?
Project up to this point has been a complete and utter failure on practically every front imaginable.
Yes, that is exactly how I would put it, a complete and utter failure.
As any kind of surprise at all. S.J. Clarkson was initially tasked with getting the band back together until he dropped out of the director's.
I thought S.J. Clarkson was a woman. I can't tell. I mean, the Google pictures of S.J. Clarkson, the AI may have gotten it wrong. This looks like a female.
Chair. Before that, Noah Hawley disregarded canon for another reboot.
Now, Noah Hawley was probably instructed to do that. I don't want to put any Star Trek stuff on them.
Which ultimately ended up being scrapped fairly late in the day after the top brass decided they wanted J.J. Abrams' crew after all.
They just knew that the J.J. Abrams crew was signed to another movie that they'd already mostly been paid for. It was only the fact that the movie took so long that they now have to be paid again. And you know what? Who can blame them? This Star Trek franchise has hurt the careers of the people in it. You can't tell me the Star Trek movie is what helped Zoe Saldana. That was the MCU. Even Chris Pine's Wonder Woman role did more for his career than being this iteration of Captain Kirk, where they have tinkered with and destroyed the Star Trek formula by eliminating the importance of Dr. McCoy. Oh, and there we have another little piece of the lie that will not end when they talk about, listen to this little piece of nonsense. Here we go.
Brass decided they wanted J.J. Abrams' crew after all.
We already went over they didn't want them, but listen to this.
Matt Shakman, who had previously worked for WandaVision on Star Trek 3.
WandaVision, Children's Hospital, 12-minute show with no script, and some episodes of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia were all Matt Shakman did, and now he's too big to be fake director for this fake project that's never going to be released, and we're about 70% of the way through here, as you can tell from the taskbar.
Was brought on board after the company hired him. At the same time, a release date for Star Trek 4 was announced, but it was subsequently pushed back.
They're just showing fake graphics of Star Trek 4 with Liam Hemsworth. It's not Thor. It's not Thor is my memory, if it's correct. It's not Thor's. It's Thor's brother, who we see in some Thor movies playing Thor in the play that Loki has put on to amuse himself. That's who you're going to get as your Captain Kirk. You're not getting Thor. You're getting Thor's brother.
He then went ahead and made the next version of the project public without first getting in touch with any of the people who were going to be acting in the freaking movie.
Right. They announced this movie because this is such a sham. They knew they couldn't get the cast. They would have had to pay them just to show up for this. They're under no more obligations. They don't have to do publicity for this movie. They timed out of their contracts. They didn't get enough movies out of these people. They got less movies out of them than they paid for them. They don't care over at Star Trek. It's not their money. They just want to get paid again from Paramount for this crap movie that no one wants. And now it's being intertwined with their bad TV shows that are not Kelvin timeline. Nothing can be reconciled. We're looking at a Star Trek multiverse here.
None of them had signed contracts to play their roles at the time.
Right, this is all bullshit. We're going to have to go multiverse to explain this. Multiverse, we're finding out, is the cheaper, more economical version of time travel with no intellectual toll. Time travel had built up too many rules and too many what-ifs and the grandfather paradox and other things of that nature that would make people question it if it wasn't written well. These people know they're terrible writers. They know it. Their last two projects, Captain Marvel and Star Trek Into Darkness, and then throw in Rings of Prime, as my pal European lore says, and Rings of Power. The LOTR send-up. Look at the last three things they've done. All terrible, all stupid. They can't, as far as Rings of Power, they were not able to reconcile their own timeline within itself. For some characters, weeks and months passed, and for other characters, days or hours passed. It was terrible and made no sense when they unified all plot lines in a time-bending, mind-bending, stupid episode 6. Star Trek Discovery and Rings of Power unable to handle time travel, so now they're going multiverse because time travel, first introduced cinematically in 1960, according to Wikipedia, in movie The Time Machine, is too complicated now to be used by these writers. They can't handle it. They're going multiverse, a concept we first heard in like 2018.
Existing someplace in limbo. This decision was made to put a lid on everything that has transpired. In a nutshell, it has been an unmitigated catastrophe, but the strategy that held the
It has been an unmitigated catastrophe.
most potential for Star Trek IV was the one that was abandoned almost immediately. The internet went completely insane when it was revealed that Chris
Insane because it was so stupid we'd seen the other actor on screen before.
Pine and Chris Hemsworth would be collaborating on an all-Chris all-star crossover.
Now, this came out after they tried to sign just Hemsworth alone, whichever Hemsworth brother they were trying for, just that person alone, and recasting them as Kirk, and fans revolted. That's why people were insane. It's only by doing things that people really, really, really deeply don't want to see that this movie gets any publicity or traction, and how that can be a recipe for
It
success.
is the kind of concept that
I don't
fans had
know.
no idea they needed until it
They had no idea they needed it because they actively hated the idea and did not want it.
was disclosed and imagined. Then we all needed it. Patrick McKay and John D. Payne,
The failures behind Rings of Power,
the authors of the narrative, referred
the failures for J.J. Abrams, who were flunkies who wrote parts of movies and said they left Star Trek Discovery because they were never able to tell a complete tale, and that Rings of Power was them unleashed and freed. Well, we saw that they really needed lesser idiot J.J. Abrams to unstupid some of their stupidity. Star Trek Discovery, a terrible show, very, very stupid, but not quite as stupid as Rings of Power was. It's just stunningly
to it
bad.
as Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade in space.
Now, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. They own Lucasfilm stuff and Star Trek stuff, and that's it. Their masters are Disney and Paramount Plus. So all they can do is look to the other properties from Lucasfilm. So they have been trying to make Chris Pine into Indiana Jones in Star Trek since day one, and they have written McCoy mostly out of the Spock-McCoy-Kirk equation. It's now the Spock-Kirk-Uhura equation.
Will remember the insane hype that surrounded this news. I mean, for the love of all that's holy in this world, and
It was insane because people were angry.
have anything good, fake cries. If
See the AI announcing parentheticals and saying things like fake cries without any irony in the voice. I don't know how they could have done worse with any voice actor, unless no one there speaks English and this was a release for another country, and Star Trek IV Recasting for Next Generation Crew Revealed title was just written by them in another language, and that maybe there's original narrative in a different language. I don't know.
Kirk Sr. had tried to flee his ship before it exploded in the prologue of Star.
Okay, that's not true. He never tried to flee his ship. He knew he was going to die as captain of the USS Kelvin, that the timeline is named for. And if you listen to my J.J. Abrams is a Terrible Filmmaker series, you will hear J.J. Abrams telling us that the word Kelvin is none other than the name of one of his grandparents, Mr. Kelvin.
Star Trek 2009, it would have been possible for him to be reunited with his on-screen son for a cosmic buddy adventure without relying on time travel.
Right, now listen to how they cheap out.
Or prime versions of the characters. So what hopes should we keep, if any?
Now, I don't think they're going to be able to pull off time travel, so what they're going to do is multiversal.
After desperately attempting to flee his ship before it blew up, Kirk Sr. would have been caught in the middle of a teleportation on.
He didn't try to flee the ship. He sat there and purposefully steered it into the Romulan ship, damaging the Romulan ship so badly that in the story of the movie we ended up getting, it was then captured by Klingons who kept the future, unfrozen future Romulans, as Kirk calls them, in a prison camp for 20 years. And that is contradicted by dialogue from Spock, who says that the Romulans came through much later, so maybe they were only in prison for a few years. But certainly J.J. Abrams elaborates on 3 completely different kinds of plots that he was using at the same time in his Star Trek 09 movie. And the movie we got was a sloppy hybrid of 3 different stories.
On paper, the concept of teaming up 2 notable people to create a science fiction blockbuster that is based on the work of one of the greatest authors of all time,
Based, but not based.
appears to have some appeal. However,
not to me.
Like we said, we can never have anything that is actually good in our lives.
Because J.J. Abrams writes it.
The concept of this movie undoubtedly sounds incredible. Despite this,
No, it doesn't.
It seems increasingly unlikely that the 4th chapter would be successful, since it has been looking increasingly hopeless. Like we said,
Right,
production hell is was. First things first.
Production hell is real. Production hell is real. But we keep hearing
Front imaginable. As a result, the fact that the components just won't come together at all should not come as any kind of surprise at all.
We've heard this already. We know where they're at. They cannot figure out how to unite this. They're trotting out Payne and McKay like they're geniuses, and they're not going to be able to write time travel. So they're going to have a teleportation incident right as the USS Kelvin flies into the Romulan ship. Now, we see the moment of impact on the bridge when he dies. He says he dies telling his wife he loves her, George Kirk, Jim Kirk's father. And this is fake Kelvin Kirk, because in the Prime continuity, we know that Kirk's father survives.
Prime versions of the characters. So what hopes should we keep, if any?
We shouldn't have any hope. This is a terrible idea.
Middle of a teleportation. On paper, the concept of teaming up 2 notable people to create a science fiction blockbuster that is based on the work of one of the greatest authors of all time appears to have some appeal. However,
it doesn't really have any appeal when you put it to the sniff test.
The concept of this movie undoubtedly sounds incredible. Despite this,
sounds fucking stupid.
Likely that the 4th chapter would be successful, since it has been looking increasingly hopeless.
Hopeless, unlikely, and unlikely to happen.
Like we said, production hell is real, and its grasp is an unforgiving bear hug that never lets go once.
In this case, it's fan apathy. It's not production hell. No one wants to pay for this movie, and when it comes out, no one, and I mean no one, is really going to see it.
It takes hold of you, other than Deadpool, of course. But that movie is so meta, we're sure Deadpool repitched the idea himself. Next generation will
we
make
are 8 or 9 years out from when this movie was supposed to come out. We are 8 or 9 years into the future.
Self. As for now, loyal Star Trekkers, it seems we will just have to wait and see what
you're going to eat your gruel and you're going to like it.
These big dumb corporations decide to do with our heroes.
It was just one corporation that got sliced into 3 pieces, honestly, when this all got started down this road. And it is bad faith, and it has been adjudicated bad faith by Bad Robot and Secret Hideout that has gotten us this bad Star Trek. Bad faith.
Used to be like, let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
That is Crime Recaps. a YouTube channel with 2.29 thousand subscribers, and this is your buddy, Admiral Teag. We've been saving Star Trek. I hope you've enjoyed this update on disastrous fraud sham Star Trek 14. 13 is a real curse. People who fear 13, don't look at Star Trek. It's only going to make you more sure that your fear of the number 13 is real. Star Trek stuck on movie 13, possibly forever. A bad faith attempt to mix the shows together into the movie. Could it be because there's no more production money for the shows now that Netflix has gotten out of the toxic contract? I want to thank you for coming by to talk about Star Trek with me. And I want to thank my pal, Ender for Life, a great YouTube creator. Listen to this amazing Kirk's Quarters ASMR they've created for me. I like meeting with you here because the bridge is just a little too busy and a place where we do the real business of Star Trek. And sometimes up there it gets violent when we encounter new Trek ships because we have no choice. We must destroy the new Trek fleet. We are at war with Commie Commodore Kurtzman. Star Trek should be a 1-hour show that mostly makes sense, that's good enough for regular TV. Star Trek should be a 1-hour show that mostly makes sense, that is good enough for regular TV. These are our demands. You can follow me on our social media at TMCTEAG on Twitter. That is the official Twitter for this channel. I thank you for joining me in this installment of Saving Star Trek, examining the Star Trek 14 sham. It's your buddy, Admiral Teag, signing off.